thanks again to everyone who's joining us tonight. My name is Jonah, and I am the product marketing manager here at Sports Reference. We're the people who run Pro Football Reference, which is a statistics website that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. We also have a thing called Stathead, which is a set of research and search tools, kind of a search engine that you can use to go inside the Pro Football Reference database and answer more complicated questions. So instead of going to Tom Brady's page and seeing how many passing yards he threw for last year, you could go to Stathead and see how many other players have had a season where they threw for that many yards, or how many times Tom Brady has had a season with 4,000 yards and how that compares to Peyton Manning and Drew Brees and everyone else. You can do that sort of thing. You can do all kinds of complex searches, which we'll go a little bit more into tonight. Yeah, so that's what I do here at Pro Football Reference. And we wanted to put it together this panel to talk a little bit about advanced stats. And the hook tonight is sports betting. So obviously with sports betting now legal in, I believe, over 30 states, some parts of Canada as well. I assume everyone tuning in tonight is in a state where it's legal. We wouldn't want to be violating any sort of rules there. With that becoming more and more popular, there are all kinds of apps, there are all kinds of deals, and football is obviously, kind of the main hook for a lot of people. It's also just, for me, a good hook for analyzing games. Like, I always look at the point spread when I'm thinking about who I just am predicting to win the game, and the over-under to see what kind of game I'm in for, and all of that stuff. It's all just kind of like a fun kind of in to talk about football, and we're stats people, so we want to look at it from a statistical angle as well. So joining us tonight, there's really no two people who are more qualified to do this than the two people we have here on the call. So joining us here tonight is first of all, I'll just go in the order that y'all are on the Zoom. So first of all, we have Chase Stewart. Chase is a lawyer. He's a dad and a freelance football writer. He created footballperspective.com, where he writes regularly. He also has written for, kind of smaller websites like the New York Times and bigger ones like profootballreference.com. So he's done a, range of both. And as we were alluding to earlier, he has a love-hate relationship with the Jets. So Chase, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited, and I think I can confidently say the Jets can only get better from here.
I think that's probably true, but I also don't want to jinx it for you by
my imagination can't comprehend a world where that is not true.
And then also joining us tonight is Jason Lisk, and Jason is a football writer, an editor, and an all-around content guy for TeamRankings.com. He revels in spelunking his way through data sets, which makes him the perfect guy for us to talk to tonight about using statistics to analyze the game. He also grew up in Kansas City. So Jason, does that mean you're a Chiefs fan, or was that a homer pick?
A complete homer pick. I mean, all Super Bowl picks are long shots, right? So why not be a homer here? Yes.
I mean, I restrained myself, but I understand.
I know.
All right. So thank you both for joining us tonight. And thank you to everyone who wrote in. And in addition to RSVPing, we had a part of the form where you were able to submit questions to the panel. So most of the questions we have tonight come from things that you asked and that you were interested in learning. And I've kind of tried to break them up by category. So we'll try to get through kind of as many of these kind of by category as possible. We may go off on some tangents, and we may kind of see where it takes us, but we're gonna try to get through as many of your questions as possible tonight. So the first question I had is just kind of like a basic, I guess if you guys just kind of want to maybe take a step back and just kind of like what is your sort of experience level, both with like using stats to analyze football games, and then maybe if you apply that to gambling, how you do that, or predicting games, kind of how your approach is. Chase, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I think before we even answer that question, I think you have to start from the level that it's pretty hard to figure out how to pick who's going to win the game against the point spread. For the most part, these lines are efficient, and that means that most of the information that's available to you is, or I should say, all of the information that is available to you is also available to the people who set the lines. And that doesn't mean they're perfect, because they're not, but it is certainly difficult. But I think when you start looking at games, at least for me, what I try and think about is what might be overrated. So in light of what I just said, what might be a place where this information is going to be looked at and it's going to be overweighted. And so things like a team's record is a case where they might be overweighted. And so teams that are really, disproportionately strong in their record, but maybe not in their strength, they tend to have a higher line, and that may be a team you want to bet against. But I certainly look, and I'm sure Jason will have similar views, at least I think so. I focus on the passing game. That tends to be the most consistent and the most important part of team success in the NFL, both long-term and short-term. And then, game-to-game variance is so large that I always feel pretty good betting on an underdog. And, I think a lot of people don't. And so that kind of goes back into the first theory.
Okay, yeah, my background is, first of all, we should say Chase and I started writing together on Pro Football Reference, a site you may have heard of. I think we might be talking about it today. 16 years ago, when I was a lawyer. Were you a lawyer yet, or were you in law school? I can't even remember.
I was in law school.
Yeah, and so we were writing statistical studies and historical things about football 16 years ago. So it was kind of a hobby then. And I was into, even in college, making power ratings, trying to figure out, I hate losing. I hate being the sucker. And like Chase said, these lines are efficient. So if I were to give one word of advice to people that were interested in sports betting, it's this: be realistic, and be humble. Because if you look at a line and your first reaction is, oh man, that is so easy, just recognize that the betting market has had plenty of opportunities to bet into that. Maybe there's an angle they haven't thought of that you are aware of, and you have this unique angle, but the odds are pretty low against that. And so if you see a line that you're not sure about, your first instinct should be, why is it where it is? What's causing that? Is it an injury? Is it some piece of information that maybe I'm not taking into account? That kind of thing. So always be humble. You have to win. If you do the minus 110 VIG, you have to win 52.3% of the time. That's hard. 50% is theoretically what you should hit. If you can hit 55, you're going to do okay. So don't listen to people that claim to hit 65 or 70 against the spread. Those people would, if they were being honest, would go win the super contest about every other year in Vegas, because that's what it takes to win with a crowd of 2,000 handicappers. So they're full of it. So 55% is good. Anything above 52.3% makes you profitable. Just be humble and figure out where your strengths are.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And yeah, I just want to echo for everybody out there that we are not going to, you're probably not going to beat the house. Even with these sort of research tools, I personally take the approach that I'm never going to, have more money at stake than I'm happy to lose. That's just kind of something that's fun for me while I'm watching the game. And so I think that's the attitude. That's the right attitude to approach it. And then it's more satisfying when you do kind of see that line and, do correctly handicap something and you're like, oh man, yeah, I crushed that one. But without the, uncut gems anxiety of maybe going a little too hard. So that was, I think, a really good place to start. And also, if you go to the Pro Football Reference blog and you can check out a lot of the kind of old articles that Jason and Chase wrote. And it's great to see that kind of work, becoming more popular now. And I feel like there's a lot more analytics in football analysis than there was certainly when you all were starting writing, years ago. So let's pivot into talking more about the stats. And I guess the place I'm going to start with is something Chase said about going beyond the record. A lot of the time, and this will be relevant to you as well, Jason, because you know, team rankings. A lot of the time, the record does not tell the whole story. Teams, you know, can be stumbling into wins, especially early in the season. I believe the Panthers were like 3-1 at one point last year, and I was starting Sam Darnold in fantasy, and that ended tragically for both them and myself. So when you're trying to go beyond the record, what are you looking at? And Jason, why don't you start us off with this one? Going deeper than just win-loss. What are you looking at?
Win-loss or even point differential. But obviously, point differential is better than win-loss in an NFL handicapping standpoint, like knowing the margins that teams are winning, because teams that are more dominant, if they win or lose close games, that's more a reflection of a couple plays at the end of the game. But if they dominate, that's better. But even beyond point differential, which has its own things, you should be looking into things that are more based on skill and less based on luck. The more you can tease out luck, the better your handicapping, especially if you think just a small part of the market is influenced by those things. If you can identify some slight biases, I'll give you examples. Handicapping. I track things like net difference in how many like luck type results. Which teams have benefited from missed field goals and extra points, fourth down turnovers, things that may be hidden that you got to dig into the box score or drive stats, turnovers, punt return, special teams touchdowns, things that are a little like very rare, like what we had like 7 or 8 kickoff returns last year. So when it happens, that's an exciting play in that game and a big impact on who's going to cover that game, probably because it's a 7-point swing. But teasing out those things, you're going to do better long-term handicapping by identifying things like which teams are better at stopping the pass consistently or passing the ball consistently or gaining yards, and then teasing out luck factors like maybe red zone performance. Like, oh, this team went 4 for 4 in the red zone. They're not going to do that every week. So they're not going to win by that margin because they over exceeded expectations. Or this team failed at the goal line. They missed a field goal. They got stopped on 4th and 1 at the goal line, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way of explaining it. I think red zone performance is a perfect example where it has an outsized impact on the game, but probably doesn't reflect a team's skill over a short sample. And so I think what I really like about what Jason says is it's really teasing out with the information you have, how much of that is skill and how much of that is luck. In any given game, because it's just one game, each team's going to have 12 drives, maybe 11 drives. That's not a lot of opportunities. And so, especially at the NFL level where the teams are generally evenly matched. And so a team being a little bit stronger than another team over 11, 12 drives, that may not really manifest itself in one game. And so even after 7, 8 games, you have a set of stats you can look at. And like Jay said, I'll look at a lot of those stats along with things like net yards per attempt for passers, first downs, how often teams are getting first downs, drive success rate, EPA, those stats to give you a sense of the true talent, because you, as much as possible, you want to eliminate the luck that's gone into the results you're analyzing, with the understanding that even if you were able to, and we're not, to get 100% confidence as to skill versus luck for past games, in the upcoming game, a lot of it's still going to be dependent on luck, and the best team's only going to beat the worst team, probably 4 out of every 5 times in an extreme case. And the 5th best team might beat the 20th best team only 6 or 6.5 times out of 10. And so understanding the amount of variance that goes into just one game, back to the earlier point about being humble, just keep all that in mind. But the best we can do is tease out as much of the skill from the data we do have when trying to predict the future.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because I think that a lot of the time you look at it as like, well, I'm going to use these stats to kind of, get the luck out of there, and then I'll know who's the best team. But we all know the best team doesn't always win. You often think about it kind of in that like reverse way, but forget that going forward, you're still leaving yourself kind of, open to that. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think another thing that kind of, came up as we were talking about this was this idea of like, people are hesitant to bet on underdogs. And certainly, whenever you kind of look at where the money goes every week, it tends to go to favorites, and people tend to enjoy betting, favorites. So when you're looking at underdogs, are you looking at the same sort of thing? Are they underperforming in the red zone? Are they solid against the pass, or solid as a passing team? Kind of like what's your approach, and how do you factor in like where the line is? Because it's often kind of hard to sometimes visualize, like the difference between a 2-point line, a 3-point line, and 4. I guess 3 is probably a key number, but like if it's -4 versus -5, like what, how are you visualizing and thinking about that? Chase, why don't you go first this time?
Yeah, so again, you're always just looking for small edges on the margin, right? And so when you're thinking about underdogs, home field advantage is kind of the first thing that pops into mind, and that's a tricky one. I don't think we actually will have an answer. Maybe Jason has the answer, but I think that's a tricky one to analyze, is how important is home field advantage? Because it used to be pretty evenly acknowledged that it was 2.5, 3 points. The last couple of years, starting in 2020 with COVID, and then continuing last year, home field advantage really decreased. And is that indicative of the new normal, or is that just a random blip? Because even over the sample size of a season or two, you could have random occurrences like that. And so whether or not home field advantage is really 1 point or 3 points, that's a pretty meaningful distinction. And so again, I don't know if there's arguments for both sides whether home field advantage really is decreasing or not, but teams who are at home and underdogs, that they kind of always stand out as potential interesting picks. Remember, the public doesn't like betting on quarterbacks that don't play well, and so to the extent there are quarterbacks, I mean, I don't like betting on quarterbacks too bad either, based on how important I think the passing game is. But there are some quarterbacks who I think maybe are pretty good, but they throw a few too many interceptions. I'm comfortable riding with somebody like that on a bet, and backing them as an underdog, and maybe I'm going to have a bad afternoon, but I'd rather take a chance on that than just giving a heavy favorite 7 points and hoping they can cover that.
I will say, and I did not check the specific data, I do think, man, 20 years ago, I would pound underdogs. I'm not sure it's quite as skewed now. I do think favorites are still more popular. Like if we sign behind me for Pool Genius, we also do pool picks, pick'em picks, and we get pick'em data like on what just people in like their local office pool are picking. And like uniformly, people pick favorites against the spread, especially casual players. That said, I'm not sure it's quite as pronounced as it used to be. I think lines used to be softer. I do think I think some segment of the market has gotten smarter. Underdogs I like. Probably Chase talked about quarterback situations, net passing yards on both sides. So if you have an underdog that maybe isn't sure, maybe they had turnover issues, but their net passing, maybe the quarterback's not sexy, but their net passing numbers, like the 49ers have great net passing numbers on both offense and defense. They're kind of a schizophrenic team, but as an underdog, they've been great because they have the talent to play with teams. And those show up in like their net passing numbers, like they're great on defense. And Garoppolo, and I think Lance will do the same. I think he'll put up large yards per attempt numbers because teams will have to play him against the run. I think teams like that catching points that can be very efficient when they pass, maybe not pass at the highest volume, but be efficient, are great underdog picks to look for.
That's really interesting. And I want to point out, just for people who are if they're tuning in on YouTube, or if you're somewhat newer to kind of football stats, that it's very important that Chase and Jason are saying net passing yards, because when you go to like Tom Brady's page and look at his passing yards and his yards per attempt, it doesn't include sacks. So the yards that are lost to sacks don't show up there. They do show up, I believe, in team numbers, but it's something that I think people can overlook if they're not thinking about it. On our site, we show both. So we have kind of the traditional, the official stat passing yards. Then we also have net passing yards per attempt, where you can factor in the sacks. And then there's even more advanced ones beyond that. But I guess what are some of the other sort of advanced stats that you guys like, or that maybe people aren't quite as aware of, that you think are interesting?
You want me to take that? Well, we talked about like several of them. I want to tease out. So I want to look at I want to look at red zone. I want to look at net yards. I want to do things that kind of eliminate the luck, like yards per drive versus points per drive. So I know people may have big thoughts about special teams, but if you can find teams that are benefiting from big plays you don't want to just look at yards. Yards is probably the worst thing to look at. But if you can look at the difference between yards versus points and which teams are underperforming points for whatever reason, there's probably ways to look at that. Just like points scored per drive, points per, versus yards gained are good ways to dig into that. We talked about sacks. The reason net yards are important is because sacks are actually a very sticky stat. Like, people think of it as an offensive line stat. It's typically a quarterback stat, and it's way more repeatable than interceptions. And so quarterbacks that take sacks tend to continue to take sacks. They hold the ball too long. Teams blitz them because they know they'll take sacks, and those things add up. So if they win one game despite high sacks, they're probably going to, because of some big plays, it may come back against them in the next game.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I feel like I say that to my friends all the time when we're talking about quarterbacks and like sacks, and that it's like, I feel like that's one thing that I wish people understood better. Let's move on. Let's move into the kind of the stat head of it, and talk a little bit about, kind of the stuff that's available on Stathead, what you all like to do, kind of maybe answer some questions. So the first thing is, I saw a question in the chat that we also got on the forum beforehand, which was about finding historical betting lines on Stathead. Stathead has both the point spread and the over/under, a complete data set of that all the way back to 1978, and you can look that up on the site. So what I'm going to do is share my screen and show you how to do that. And this will be kind of like maybe a good starting point for us to go off from on the Stathead idea. So this is what the Stathead football kind of front page looks like, and you can see all of the different search engines or research tools that we have here. They're divided up by player and team, and there's some draft options down here. There's something for you to do trade research, but for point spread stuff, you're going to want to go to the team game finder, and once I have that open in here, we've already made the switch over to 2022. So this week there's not going to be any default search while we're waiting for games. But if you go down to the statistical filter section, you'll see the second section right after points is the Vegas data. So that's the point spread and the over under. So if I wanted to see last year how teams that were 7-point underdogs, let's say, I'd go into point spread, and I would do greater than or equal to 7. So that means that they were given at least 7 points. They're 7-point underdogs. You could also do it the other way. So if I wanted to see who was favored by 7, they'd be -7, and I'd obviously flip that sign. But for this case, this is what I'm going to do, and then I'll click on here, get results, and then after a minute it'll load. So this is just a list of every team that was a 7-point underdog, and then you can also see over here whether they covered, and then the over/under result as well. But you can do a little bit more than that. You can click, instead of this top search I did, which is just find teams with games, which just gives us a list of games, I can click over onto this one, which is totals from all games in a season. And then when I run that, it'll give me basically combined team stats. So I'll do, I guess wins is probably the most logical thing. So I'll run this. So these are now teams that were, okay, I see. Yeah, I did the wrong one. So that's going to be a little funky because it's adding up the average point spread for the season, which honestly, I didn't realize we could do that until this moment. That's how crazy Stathead is there's stuff in here that even I forget. So this is actually, if we want to see teams that were 7-point underdogs on average throughout the entire season.
That's a bad place to be. Bad place to be.
Yeah.
For last year. For last year.
These are I'm sorry, Chase, you're catching us straight here. I did not plan on that when I did this. What we want to do instead is go to find teams with the most games in the season matching criteria. And now we're going to see every time a team that was at least a 7-point underdog. So the Texans had the most. They were 7-point underdogs 13 times. The Lions were 10 and the Giants were 9. So we're actually working on getting back in functionality for this that will show you not just the number of times they did it, but their won-loss record. So you'll be able to see how they fared in these games, how many games they won and lost straight up, and then also how they did against the spread, whether they covered or whether they lost by more than the spread. So that is how you do that sort of point spread research in Stathead. And like I said, that's historic back to 1978. So if there's some kind of crazy underdog by a huge margin or some kind of crazy over under, and you want to see how that looks historically, just plug it into Stathead, do the search I just did, and you're good to go. But I'm interested to hear from Chase and Jason about kind of like some of the stuff you like to do in Stathead, some of the research that you're doing in there. So I'm not sure whichever one of you wants to start. I kind of lost track of who.
Yeah, I'll start. There's so many things you can do, and obviously, like you said, there's the team game finder. There's also the player finder. I like to use a lot of this for, understanding the magnitude of events. So it's really, getting a sense of historical perspective, and I think that's really helpful. I can walk you through a quick search if you go to the team game finder. So this is one of the searches I did, sometime last year. Last year, the Jaguars, this was in the final game of the season, so yeah, keep it on single games, and they beat the Colts by, they won by more than 14 points, or at least 14 points, and they were underdogs of at least 14 points. So I say, how rare is that? So I went to, in there, I made the point differential at least 14. So you win by at least 14, but you're also an underdog of at least 14. That felt pretty rare to me, and I was curious, how rare was that? So type that into Stathead, and you found out, wow, it's actually only happened 6 times. And I did kind of recall it happening recently. I remember the Bills-Vikings game was the one that was sticking out in my head. But stuff like this is a great way to, you're watching a game on Sunday, you see this crazy result, and you think, is this really crazy, or is this just a little crazy? Give me a sense of historical perspectives. That's one of the things I like to use Stathead for, is to kind of understand how likely some of these crazy events we see every Sunday really are.
I love that search, Chase, because the next 2 on that list happened in the last few years, and they were huge big survivor pool guy. I don't know how many people out there are. Those were huge survivor pool events that basically wiped out large chunks of pools and won people money that played against those, heavy favorites. Atlanta in 2019, and then that Bills Vikings. I think the Vikings were being picked by like 60% of people in pools. So it wiped out right away at the start of the season, everybody. Anyway,
I feel like frequently when you do a search for something crazy that happened at a Saints-Falcons game, somehow getting involved. That's always wrong.
I think that was the Josh Allen's first start, by the way.
Really?
Minnesota game, yes. That's why the line was what it was. People were down on the Bills. They'd been blown out, and they switched quarterbacks.
And one of the cool things about Stathead is because it's connected to Pro Football Reference, you can easily click to the box score and see that. So, so we can go back and see it was his first start. And you can click back and forth between Pro Football Reference, and if you want to look up that Bills team, you can go to their page. All that stuff is linked on here. So Jason, what about you? What's something that maybe comes to mind when you think about how you use Stathead?
Well, I know Chase has this pure curiosity for when this event happened, but I'll give you some examples that I've used for betting and modeling. Even recently, if you want to go back to the team game finder. So player props, for example, one area of, so if you want to I built I pulled all the data from spreads and totals for recent years. So if you want to just I don't think we want to pull all the data, but basically I made sure passing stats were included. And so I want to know okay, what's my median expectation? What should I expect for a team that's a 7-point favorite with an over under of 50? What should I expect to see? And then I can adjust what I'm seeing at the sports books off that. And so I might do something like that. Where I check maybe even a range, or you can just set that, because I don't know what our sample size will be. I try to expand out to get a large enough sample size. And then I might have the passing yards and I see the range of outcomes. It's kind of like where the median is and where the range is of outcomes. And we got to remember here, if you do that, those are net yards, right? In that column that you just clicked on, that's correct, right?
Yes, yeah, that's going to be net
So
yards.
you want to for a passing prop, which is
Yeah.
gross yards, usually like sports books, they're like what the individual passer passed for. Sack yards have to get added on, so that was actually like 491 yards passing in that game by Tom Brady against the hapless Lions.
Yeah, that's really cool. And for people who are curious about how to kind of do that sort of next level, we got a couple questions about that. Like, what if I want to put this in Excel and you know, average stuff out, look more into it. The way to do that is if you hover over this export data button and you click get as Excel workbook, it'll just download an Excel spreadsheet with the results that are on this page. And then once you have that, if you are an Excel whiz or if you have, you know, programming stuff, you can very easily plug it into whatever you're using to model and analyze from there and go from there. So that's just really, we got a couple questions about that, so I wanted to make sure we touched on that. I think that's enough. That's enough marketing. That's enough sales stuff. Unless you guys have more Stathead that you want to talk about.
Oh yeah, I'll look at things like touchdown passes and like what percentage of, you know, quarterbacks will throw for 3 or more touchdowns or whatever in various types of games, just to get like some perspective. Because a lot of times you look at these numbers and intuitively you're not sure, like in outcomes like that are kind of rare events where 2 or 3 is like, you know, a big difference. What the odds are of it happening, and looking at historical data will kind of inform you if you can run these searches and kind of get a sense of like what kind of outcomes you may see.
Yeah, and you can also look and see like you know, in tandem, like if team's favored by 7 and the over under is 54, like how often do they cover the spread, or how often do they cover the over or the under? You know, all of that stuff is obviously very, very heavily you know, formalized, I think. But yeah.
And on, you know, the player finder, the same thing. I think that I'll continue the marketing pitch. The player finder is so many options and tools, and it just lets you understand the game better. I'll give you the Jets example. I was thinking, you know, if Joe Flacco is going to be the Jets starting quarterback, one of the things you can do is because if you look at Joe Flacco's stats, he's played a lot of games now as a starter, but you can use this to say, I want to look only at games where he started. And so being able to not just, you know, for quarterbacks who maybe are splitting time, they play, you know, as a reserve sometimes, having filters like, hey, I can now search just for games they start. That's a really cool feature. You get to better understand what you're looking for and do it more quickly than just say looking at Pro Football Reference for the raw data.
Yeah, I think one thing that people miss about Stathead is that the game finder can also function on kind of that season level by putting those filters in, and then you can look at splits like that. So when you do this, find totals from all games and combined seasons. And then like Chase said, if you go down to the player filters and select starter or reserve, you can click start a game, and then this will pull up all of the quarterback stats for games they started. And I can also do a specific player. So if I want to look up Flacco's stats as a starter, I can put all of those different search types together. I've got Flacco in there. And then when I run this is just his stats in games he started versus games.
And you could do it for just like the last 3 years, and then you can say, oh, wow, this would be really bad if he has to start for the Jets. So that's the real function of this.
You don't need
depending on what you can do,
to determine what's bad for the Jets.
Yeah,
you can see 13 starts.
Could be a torture device.
13 starts and 14 touchdown passes and 2,961 yards does not give me a lot of optimism.
Yeah,
that's what I use Stathead for, is to make my day worse.
That's a really compelling sales pitch. I hope Sam puts that in like a TV ad. We'll run it during the Super Bowl.
Make your day worse. Use Stathead.
Yes.
So I hope you all got that's just a taste of what you can do with Stathead. We didn't really even get into the gameplay finder, which I use all the time, but lets you break down stats by like down or distance. When you're doing that sort of red zone research they were talking about, you can do that in there. If you want to see fourth quarter stats, if you're looking for, you know, who's clutch. One fun thing I always look at, there's no real like advantage to it, I just like to see it, is like who's good at deep passing. It's just like, oh, you know, maybe when I'm picking which game to watch on Sunday, it's like, oh, who throws the most deep passes and who's, you know, completing the highest percentage of them. So
I'll
all
give
that
you
stuff
one
is-
more quick one. You don't have to pull it up, but just another fun thing with the play finder I love to do is for quarterbacks, you can do it and then you can sort by targets. And so I always think it's interesting, you know, especially a guy who's played for 5-6 years, who have they thrown the most passes to, and just getting a sense, and then you can maybe put that into Excel and calculate, oh, 20% of his passes for his career has gone to this receiver, 15 to this player. And comparing that across quarterbacks can be pretty revealing. So that's just another, you know, fun use of the play finder, is breaking down target level, because you can't really do that anywhere else without that, you know, Stathead function.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to share. Looking through the chat, it seemed like people did want to see more of these, so I'm just going to go show them how to do that. Can you walk me through that search again, Chase?
So let's. Why don't you pick, say, maybe how about Matt Stafford? So let's put his name in there. I'll say who's he thrown the most passes to. So it's probably Calvin Johnson. But you know, you can get a sense of what is, and if you go, I guess this will give us his passing yards. Then we'll start down. You can see who you can sort it by target list once we scroll down here. There you go. And so, okay, yeah. So Calvin Johnson's had a lot of targets. Then Golden Tate, then Marvin Jones. And you know what I typically do is I'll then throw this into Excel and calculate on a percentage of, you know, Stafford's total targets, just to compare it among quarterbacks. But something like this is not available on Pro Football Reference or probably any other site, at least that I can think of, where you can see who Matt Stafford's thrown every pass to in his career.
And you can do that the other way too. So like you can look up Larry Fitzgerald and see who every single person who's thrown him a pass, so again, you just sort it by attempts, and you can see it's kind of a motley crew here of quarterbacks for him. Yeah, no, I think that's one of the really cool features. He was also used as a passer 4 times, so that is an interesting find as well. So yeah, no, that's a really cool search that you can do in the play finder. Yeah, I don't know. Do you guys want to do one more, or should we move on? Or
Like if I'm just sitting around on Sundays and you know, things happen in games and I'm curious, I think it's probably there's various things. The drive finder will work. Like, so if you're like, okay, how many teams actually score when they get the ball with like 2 minutes left or whatever, you can look that up. You can set your parameters and see kind of like starting field position and see how often they score. And you can put margins, right? I think there's a way to put margins. Maybe there's not on here. Is there a way to put
it looks like
margins?
there's not, because I can't add like drive start twice, but you can go and yeah, so I couldn't do like 10 to 20, unfortunately, but I think there is with time remaining. Yeah, so you can do like last 2 minutes. And then I guess we'll say inside like the 25 or something. And I guess we want the second quarter. And
there is. See down at the very bottom, scoring margin. I knew it was on there. If you go
scoring margin. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So you could say I only want to see where they're down by like between 4 and 7, so they need a touchdown or whatever. You can search for that between, like, you probably want negative there, or no? Like,
oh yeah, I do. Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
7 and
The signs matter in this.
yeah.
It's trailing.
I probably should have done -8, but people get the idea.
Yeah, you can look up like drives and how frequently they score and various things.
Yeah, I think one thing that I always I forget, you know, I think people don't realize is in here, is that it doesn't just give you the list of drives, but it shows the like percentage of times that either like a single team has scored, or you could just put it into Excel and get league wide those numbers. So yeah, all that stuff is really cool.
You can search this and then get mad at your coaches when they kick for the tie with like 2 minutes left or whatever, and then see how frequently your team is now behind the 8 ball because they're giving the ball back in a tie game or whatever. You know, with coaching decisions, you can check kind of some of the drive finder to see what historical stats are in these things.
So we got a couple more kind of statistics questions in the chat. One thing that someone was asking kind of in the Q&A, I think, is kind of like, how do you think about, you know, obviously like a lot of the sites print like third down conversion rate and fourth down conversion rate. You can find those stats easily, but you don't really see as much first and second down success rate. Like, how is that? Like, how do you look at that? And do you think that's maybe something that people should be looking at instead of just the stats that are easy to find on third and fourth down?
But I think the first answer is that sounds like something you could study, right? That feels like an objective question with probably a right and wrong answer, where you can at least get a sense of teams that are, that are really good on first and second downs. How are they against the spread? That feels like something you obviously want to have two different samples that you're looking at. I don't know, Jason, if you've looked into something like that or not, or any kind of gut reactions as to how those teams might fare.
I don't know that I've looked into it, other than to know like your success. If you can avoid third downs, you're going to win. Third downs are another, you know what I'm saying? Third downs are another, like, kind of, it's not complete luck. Better quarterbacks do better in longer yard third down situations than not good quarterbacks, for example. But if you can have a lot of drives where you don't even get to third down, because third down is a luck factor. Like, you'll see a team go 9 for 13 one game and 2 for 13 the next. It happens where they just miss the key play, the key throw, they drop it. So I would think success on first down, and you could probably find that in the gameplay finder too. Like, you could see like how many teams gain X 5 yards or whatever or more on first down, first and 10 or whatever. You could run those searches, I'm sure.
And avoiding third down is definitely a good key to being a good team, and you'll also have a bigger sample size, right? So teams have a lot more first down plays than third down plays. So I agree. That sounds like a stat I'd be curious to look at.
Yeah, and a lot of that you could get a lot of the raw data to analyze with the gameplay finder, and I think you can also use that to look up kind of first down passing rates and stuff like that. I know that generally you want teams to be passing on early downs to put themselves in a better position to succeed. Generally, obviously, it might be situationally not exactly what you want. Desert Cottontail had an interesting question. I just wanted to make sure that I get to that one, which is, can I search by a QB on a Thursday night? Can I see their stats when they go across the country? And the answer to both of those questions is yes, you can do that in Stathead. There are filters for both the day of the week and the time zone that the game takes place in. So if you want to see Russell Wilson on the East Coast, or how other road, like a different road quarterback on the West Coast, you can do all of that sort of research in the player game finder using those filters in Stathead. So we are starting to run towards the end. We still have a little bit of time left. So make sure you get those questions in if you still have them. Either just drop them in the chat or put them in the Q&A. But for you guys, since there's 10 minutes left, I figure let's talk a little bit about this season, and maybe some teams you like, some teams you don't like. So I guess just first of all, do you have any futures in right now? Are there any that you feel particularly good about or particularly passionate about? Jason, why don't you go first?
Well, as it turns out, at my site, TeamRankings and our betting portion of the site, BetIQ, I've been posting staff picks, kind of my thoughts over the summer on futures, but a lot of those aren't available at the lines I put them out. Like, they've moved the lines obviously after they get action, and like one of my early favorites,
you're moving the lines.
or people that I suggest, along with me, or it's just random, right? It's a bad line. Like, I'll give you an example. Back in early June, I thought Baltimore was mispriced to win the division because I didn't think the market was accurately assessing the risk for Deshaun Watson. I thought the Browns were priced too high. And I think it's borne out. The market's since moved, and we now know the suspension. And I thought the Ravens would be the biggest beneficiary of that. I also think the Ravens were undervalued because they had so many defensive and key injuries last year that, they've been a pretty good team for like several years. They finally had a hiccup, but it was injury related. Lamar Jackson missed the last 5 or 6 games. They lost all their running backs, and their secondary was wrecked. So anyway, I thought Baltimore was mispriced. That one's moved on me. Christian McCaffrey was like plus 1,600 to win comeback player of the year. That was based on the fantasy football market. I mean, if he's going top 2 or 3 there, I'm like, if he just hits his median outcome, he's going to be a candidate for comeback player of the year. I thought that was a bit soft, and it's since moved. Some things that might still be there. I'm trying to think of some I like. I'm not opposed to Dallas. It's a longer shot bet. It's like plus 240, 250, wherever you can get it. Maybe you'll be close to plus 200. Dallas missing the playoffs. There's several, at least when you're looking at a favorite, you want to say, what are the downside cases for this team? They've moved on from Amari Cooper, and there are major questions at receiver. Michael Gallup not going to be playing to start the year. It's all CeeDee Lamb and not much else proven behind him. They just had the Tyron Smith injury, and the Eagles are on the rise. So I think there's lots of potential like risk factors for Dallas. Still a good team. If you put a gun to my head, I say they make the playoffs at even money. But if I'm getting money, that's kind of what I like, is the risk for Dallas. I also like kind of fading Tampa Bay with all the offseason and changes they've had. But again, that market's moved since. Yeah, it's still 11.5, but I don't want to get too in deep for people, but like they changed the price. You want to be price sensitive. Right now, you got to pay like minus 150 to take the under on Tampa, where you could get it for minus 110 a month and a half ago. And so just all the stuff. I mean, Tom Brady's really good, but 11.5 is a lot of wins when he's lost Gronk, when Chris Godwin may not be at 100%, when they've got personnel changes and offensive line injury issues. Anyway, those are some of my favorites.
Yeah, and I think great points by Jason. I'm going to look at a team that I don't like, which is the Patriots. I do feel like they've had a lot of bad press in the last couple months, and I think that tends to be overrated, or at least overvalued in the market. We'll see if I'm right or wrong, but I look at them last year, and they were really good in terms of points differential. I think they finished second in the NFL. They had an extremely embarrassing loss in the playoffs, which was enjoyable to, I think, everybody in the country. But, that tends to stick in the minds of people. And so you think second-year quarterback, they tend to get, that's when, quarterbacks make a big jump. The Patriots feel like a team that's undervalued. I think they're still at 8.5 in terms of wins. That feels to me like a good bet. I'd like to take the over on New England and fade a lot of the criticism that they're getting. Sticking with I like some good coaches who have a good success rate. I also like the Steelers over at 7.5. I think Ben Roethlisberger was really not adding much value, and so compared to a replacement level quarterback in the last year, I don't know if losing him is going to be as significant as people think. And I think sharp people don't really think it's a huge loss, but I think that number still feels low. And I think Mike Tomlin's a terrific coach who really, I think he's got criticism for high profile, in-game decisions, but in terms of week to week, season to season, he's an outstanding motivator. He gets the most out of his team, and they always play up to their talent. So those are two teams where I'd like the over. I thought the same thing about the Bucks with the under, but I agree with Jason that line's getting expensive.
And I hope everybody realizes how hard it was for Chase to say those things about the Patriots. Very difficult. And I looked down on my list. I actually had the Patriots plus 160 to make the playoffs because they're an underdog. That people actually, you can get more money than you risk because people think they're less than 50% to make the playoffs. That line hasn't moved. That's actually one that I was a little worried, but I think it's because of the bad press. I do think there's probably some legit reasons there, Chase, but I don't know. I also have faith in Belichick. I think people are down on the offensive coordinator situation, but this is a team that dominated their schedule last year and mostly has the same offensive skill players back and the quarterback and has Bill Belichick. So I could see the Patriots getting off to a slowish start and then Belichick doing the old rope-a-dope and this team getting on a run because it's coached by Bill Belichick. And so I agree with you there. So yeah, I think that's a good one as well. I liked Carolina over, by the way. That line moved once Mayfield got traded, but you mentioned them being 3-0. They were wrecked by injuries last year. It was another, and Sam Darnold was the quarterback, and they lost McCaffrey. And I know people debate the value of running backs, but I think McCaffrey is one of those exceptions. He's a receiving running back that drives that offense. And I think they'll be better if he's in, plus the addition of Mayfield. I think that's a team. I'm not saying they're going to make the playoffs, but I think Carolina will be competitive this year.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about about McCaffrey. He's certainly like when he's on, he's as much of a receiver almost as he is a running back. And let's get we got one last question from the Q&A that I guess I'll just throw out to you guys. The person who asked it wanted to know that we've been talking a lot about how special teams is pretty luck based. Special teams, returns, touchdowns, all of that stuff can be pretty fluky. But special teams is also part of the game when you're handicapping it. So are there stats that are worth looking at? Is that worth evaluating, or is it just kind of such a coin toss that it's not worth thinking about that hard?
I do think there are teams that are good at special. Obviously, I'm not going to say every team's equal. Big events are overrated. But like the Patriots are a great example through much of Belichick's era. They win the little hidden yards consistently. They don't hurt themselves. The opponent always has worse starting field position than them on average over the year. And some of that is special teams. Some of that's also not turning the ball over as much as the opponent. But you can look at the average starting field position to kind of get a sense of which teams are better at kind of making their opponents earn it more. I would tease out like missed field goals from other special teams events. Those I'm less convinced teams control when the kicker decides to hook it than other special teams factors. But a team's own kicking game is probably a little like Justin Tucker's going to be good. You can look at maybe go beyond a small sample size, but look at which kickers have success over time. But tease out those that are benefiting from, say, an excessive number of misses by the opponent that they really have no control over.
Yeah, that was the one I was going to name. So you stole my thunder. The
I tried.
opposing missed field goals is an interesting one, and you'd be surprised. There's actually year to year within the season, there's a decent variance. You know, some teams, the opponents will hit 95% of the field goals. Some teams will be 70. So that can have a big impact on points scored and points allowed. You know, what I'll say, I'll take in a little bit of a different direction. I've thought this for a couple of years. I haven't really written it or seen it written, but I think special teams has really become less important over time. And they basically legislated out of the game, plus other factors have made it less important. So a couple things. One, they've really de-emphasized kick returns. And so kick returns used to be an important part of, you know, special teams. There are so few kick returns now that's an area that's no longer meaningful and a differentiator. Because teams are going for it more frequently on fourth down, punting is becoming less important. And so having a good punter is also less meaningful when teams are going to choose to go for it more frequently. And then keep in mind, field goal percentage in general is just increasing. So, 15 years ago, there was a bigger spread between the best kickers and the worst kickers. Maybe it was 90% and 70%. Now it's 80, 85%, 95%. That's a smaller margin. So all these things make the best teams and the worst teams at special teams pretty compressed. You also have, coaches continuing to emphasize ball security. And so there used to be a lot of fumbles on special teams. That's really becoming less significant now. And so those big plays on special teams, fumbles, kick return touchdowns, punt return touchdowns, we're just seeing less and less of them each year. And that means they're going to have less impact on the game.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think that's one of the most fun parts of trying to handicap this, but also one of the most difficult ones is that like the game is constantly changing and evolving. It's so different now than it was even like 5 years ago. And it's something that I'm looking forward to just seeing how it changes again. But I think that's probably going to be it. I think we'll go ahead and wrap this up. So first of all, I want to thank our panelists so much for taking the time to join us tonight. Chase Stewart, Football Perspective, and Jason Lisk at TeamRankings.com. Check both of their sites out. Follow them on social media. Is there anything else you guys want to plug while we're here before we go?
Well,
Jason, he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, if you're playing the survivor pools, I'm actually going to be doing a lot more podcast and audio content. There's a big contest in Vegas called the Circa Survivor Contest I'll be talking about on some episodes, things like that. So if you're a big survivor pool player, it's a great strategic game that also involves traditional betting elements of handicapping, but then you have to think about game theory and how to win in a pool. where you can only pick each team once per year. So fun game. Check us out. We have products related to that. That's my pitch.
Yep, and you can follow me on Twitter, FBDoChase. But I think most important, subscribe to Stathead. Go to Pro Football Reference every day. Enjoy the season.
Yeah, so Stathead is available for you to subscribe to. You can do it monthly and for $8 a month. And when you sign up that way, your first month is totally free. So you can try it out for the first 4 weeks of the season, see how you like it, use these searches that we're giving you, find new ones, and then do the whole thing for free and get to know it before you start paying money for it. If you are coming away from this and saying, nah, I know I want it, lock me in now, you can get a full year for $80. So that's like basically 2 months free. We also have Stathead products for baseball, basketball, and hockey. Obviously, baseball is coming to the postseason very soon. So it's really crunch time over there. Basketball and hockey are starting up next month. So if you like more than just football, we've got plenty of stuff for that. We didn't get into college football, but we do have a college football website. We don't have a stat head for it right now, but there is college football reference. And there's plenty of free stats available on Pro Football Reference as well. So thank you all so much for watching this video, for coming to the webinar tonight, or if you're watching on YouTube, thanks so much for watching it there. If you're here tonight and you want to go back and review it, we'll be sending the link around to the email that you used to RSVP. So you should be getting the video from us at some point in the next day or two, if you want to go back and watch some of the stuff we did or review some of the points we made. Lastly, if you have more questions, if you want to know more about Stathead or how to use it, don't hesitate to contact us. You can email us support@stathead.com. Katie, who's been in the Q&A in the chat answering questions all night, she runs that. She is super knowledgeable and will be able to help you with any questions you have about the product. You can also hit us up on social media. We're at PFRef for Pro Football Reference, and at Stathead for Stathead. Follow both accounts. Send your questions to either one. We're always happy to help. So I think that will do it. But thanks again so much to our panelists, and thanks to our viewers for coming out tonight. Hope you all enjoy the 2022 football season.